This is R2D Tech once again coming to you from self-isolation, and today we'll be having a look at the Realme 6 Pro. First up with this phone is the price. For around £250 or $320 if you're in the US, this is a great deal. Sure, it does run Realme UI rather than stock Android, but this is over Android 10, so you are up to date when it comes to software. It's just they've put their skin over the top. But if you're really keen on the stock Android experience, this phone might not be for you. Personally, I'm not too bothered by their software. I think it's actually quite nice. They've implemented some features which you don't really get on stock Android. For example, some cool animations. I'll try to put some of those up above now. Comment below, would you mind using this UI? Because I don't really think it's as much of a big deal as some people make it out to be. Another thing, if you're a really big headphone jack person, you'll be really pleased to know that this actually does have the 3.5mm jack. So you can finally go back to using those wired earphones. To be honest, not having it is not such a big deal in 2020, but I can definitely understand if you really appreciate the quality that you get from wired headphones. Unfortunately, being the budget phone which this is, the camera isn't too impressive. Don't get me wrong, the primary lens is 64 megapixels, and the telephoto is 12 megapixels, which should get the job done fine, but then the ultra wide is only 8 megapixels, so you might see a slight decrease in sharpness and quality with this specific lens. If you're not that big on using the ultra wide though, then this won't be a big deal for you, and for the price point it's still a very good camera. They even throw in a macro lens, which is very unusual for a smartphone, but it's only 2 megapixels, so I wouldn't really be relying on images from that lens. If you're not familiar with these budget style phones though, I would say don't be fooled by the megapixel count. Yes, the primary lens is 64 megapixels, but we have seen in the past that with budget phones like this, the megapixel count might be very high, but then the software processing does let you down when it comes to image quality. Definitely though, for the very low price point, you are going to be getting your money's worth and more with the camera. Also, don't forget that Gcam is always available to download because it's an Android device, so you can get better quality photos from that if you want. Being very keen on filming video with my smartphone, this camera only goes up to 4K 30 FPS, not 60. But then if you film in 1080p, you can actually do 30, 60, or even 120 frames per second, which is actually very, very good. To be honest, we even film our videos in 1080p now rather than 4K because the file size is so much smaller, and also most people only have a 1080p display to view content on. So filming with this 1080p lens in 30 or 60 frames per second, or even 120 will be just fine, especially since you're only paying £250 for it. On the front you get your standard selfie camera, but you also get an ultra wide, and that's really impressive for a budget phone like this. I really believe that people underrate this secondary lens. Being able to widen the perspective when you're taking a selfie is, in my opinion, very important. I'm always in that situation where I'm trying to get a family selfie, for example, and I'm just struggling to fit everyone in, so this is actually a really cool feature to have. Unfortunately, the selfie camera only does go up to 1080p 30 frames per second, but it's a trade-off you're probably willing to make for this price point. Now onto the processor. No, unfortunately you will not be getting the very latest and greatest Snapdragon 865 with this phone, nor will you be getting the 855, the 855 Plus, or the 845. You'll be getting the Snapdragon 720G, and you also won't be getting the very latest Adreno GPU. You'll be getting the Adreno 618. But that should be expected with a budget phone, and for the daily user it should be just fine. When it comes to RAM and storage, you can choose between 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you can go up to 128 gigabytes of storage. I always mention this, but storage is not a big deal these days with smartphones. With the cloud services available by Google, Google Photos, Google Drive, you don't really need to have a lot of storage on your phone. So personally, unless you like downloading lots of movies and things, I think 128 gigs would be perfectly fine. The RAM is also perfectly sufficient. You probably won't be using any more than 6 or 8 gigabytes of RAM anyway. Past that point, it becomes a bit of a gimmick. Now, I never thought I'd say this for a budget phone like this, but you do get a 90Hz refresh rate display. I should probably remind everyone that Apple's phones still run on 60Hz displays. Of course, the 90Hz will give you a much more fluid experience when you're navigating through the software, but it will also make gaming slightly more fun. Everything feels slightly more responsive with 90Hz. Is it the 120Hz you get with the Galaxy Ultra? No, but it's definitely better than you get on lots of other phones, and for the price point, it's actually amazing. The display itself is not the most impressive. It's 6.6 inches, which is arguably very large, but it is an LCD panel, not an OLED. And the brightness goes up to 480 nits, which isn't amazing. For the average consumer, this will probably be just fine. As we've seen on the iPhone XR, for example, an LCD display can look very good and very vibrant. And for most people, you probably won't even tell the difference between this and an OLED. I wouldn't let this hold you back from buying this phone unless you are very picky about how you see your content and you really want the ultimate quality, which would be OLED at the moment. The battery in this phone is 4,300 milliamp hours. That is quite large, especially for a budget phone. But remember, the software optimization won't be amazing on this phone, and the 90Hz will drain that battery along with the large display. Definitely though, having an LCD display will actually help you with battery life because it won't drain the battery as much as an OLED panel would. I would personally expect to have decent battery life with this phone. On top of that, you do get 30-watt fast charging, which they call VOOC charging, and this should get you up to 100% battery life within an hour. That is very impressive. If you are still worried about the amount of storage you get, there is a micro SD card slot, so you can actually expand that storage slightly. But once again, I don't particularly think that that will be necessary. Let's quickly discuss build quality. This is a budget phone, remember, so unfortunately you will not be getting that aluminium frame which you'd expect on most phones these days. It is actually plastic. This doesn't really seem like a big deal to me. You are still getting that glass back, and you're getting Gorilla Glass 5 on the front, which no, it's not the latest Gorilla Glass 6, but it should be just fine, especially if you pair it with a good screen protector. When you're only paying £250 for a phone, then of course you're not going to get everything, and the build quality will not be anything spectacular, but this phone covers most areas and can get most things that I would need done, and probably the same for most consumers out there. In a market where lots of flagship phones are upwards of £1,000 now, which personally I think is absolutely ridiculous, a phone like this is just a gift. So I would be inclined to recommend this phone to anyone who only wants to spend around £300 on a phone, because despite the price and despite lacking some features, it's still a very good phone. If you do disagree with anything I've said in this video, or you have any experience with this product yourself, then let me know in the comments below and I welcome any feedback. I hope everyone's still keeping healthy and doing something creative to pass the time with the coronavirus going on at the moment. Stay safe everyone, and I'll keep rolling out this content once a week, so stay tuned. And of course, if you liked the video, hit that thumbs up button, and if you loved it, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our videos.